Dr. Roxanne Bailey is a senior lecturer in computer science education at the Faculty of Education, Northwest University. In the old days, I was also there. It was then called Potchefstroom University. Our main research focus is the promotion of self-directed learning through the implementation of cooperative learning and blending learning, especially in the fields of computer science and education. She has received several research grants for her research and is currently involved in 3 research projects aimed at investigating technology-supported cooperative learning in computer science education modules. Roxanne was also selected as one of the 3 research fellows to complete a 4-month fellowship under the guidance of UNESCO Chair for Personalized and Adaptive Distance Learning. She has published her works on national and international levels, and she acts as a supervisor for postgraduate students. Apart from her research focus being implemented mostly in computer science education modules, Roxanne also investigated strategies for supporting novice programmers at high school level. In grade 10 as well as tertiary level BH students, where she does introduction to programming for them. Thank you very much, Roxanne, and thank you for your time that you sharing with us, that you can present to us as well.
Thank you, and
I'm
thank you
giving
for
it
that.
over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity. Now, we are all very happy that we are computer literate, but oftentimes computers can, yeah, do whatever they want. So please do bear with me. I'm going to start my presentation. And I think we're also tired of this "can you see my screen" question, but may I just ask, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you very much. So colleagues, yes, as was mentioned, I'm Roxanne Bailey, and I'm from Northwest University, and I've been there since the beginning. I started studying my BEd IT. I had a major in IT education in 2006 already, so that gives away my age. And just also a little bit of a background, specifically thinking about the fact that we are speaking about novice programming. I had computer science higher grade at high school level, and that was my first let's say introduction to programming was in grade 10. And luckily, that's also where my love for programming started. So that's also why I actually chose to then become an IT teacher. That's what I wanted to be. So with that being said, let's get going. So if I can ask you, if you have your cell phones with you, or your even if you rather feel like going on your browser, if you wouldn't mind, please going to Mentimeter. You can follow the link. I will try and put it in the chat. Let me see if I can do that. You go. You should be able to follow that link. Maybe let me just, for data's sake, I'm going to just switch off my camera just to make that a bit easier. So if you can go to the Mentimeter, that would be great. Bertie, maybe I can just ask you, I see we've got 6 people who have joined. Have you been able to join, Bertie?
Yes, I'm here.
To put you on the spot. Okay, 7. Maybe we can just wait till we have.
I've just moved back to the slide that has the QR code.
Thank you, Bertie. There's also the code. If you are on Mentimeter and it asks you for a code if you want to join a presentation, you can also just type in the code. That should also work.
Sorry, I missed it. What is the code?
It's 96. Let me share that instead of my presentation. You should be able to see that 9618127.
Roxanne, sorry, it's Suki. I would just want to tell you we are struggling to get into Menti. We've tried from the browser and the phone, so that might be the reason why some people are not joining.
Okay, I see we've got 27 people joined already. So maybe if you can just refresh your browsers. Suki, I know you know how to do this. So if you're struggling, I know it's not you, it's me. That old saying. We've got 29 now. Suki, any luck on your side?
Still waiting, but it's fine, Roxanne, as long as you know we are here.
Okay.
Good luck.
All right. We've got 31 people who have joined. So let's start. For those who have joined, I think we have enough people to actually be able to get going. So the question being, how did you first learn to program? Self-taught, resource-based teaching. So that means YouTube or textbooks or whatever, also being self-taught, but perhaps with a lecturer. And then I was taught by a lecturer or a teacher, saying that you relied heavily on them, not you didn't teach yourself at all. That's the difference between being self-taught and being taught by a lecturer. And then resource-based, of course, saying that if you're watching a YouTube video, then, and that might have been a lecturer teaching you via a resource, but you were actually engaging with that resource. Okay, I was taught by a lecturer, teacher, definitely taking the biggest chunk at the moment, self-taught being 8, and then resource-based. I'm going to just give 10 more seconds. Okay, next question. When faced with a new programming language, what's your feeling? You can just type in, it should give you an opportunity to just type in any word that you are feeling. I just want to actually see that we're just getting to know each other, to see how we are feeling. How do we view programming? Okay, excited. That is very good to know. Oh, scared. That's the general feeling I get from my students more. Intimidated, challenging, which is not necessarily negative. Overwhelmed. Interested. I think someone's mic might be open. I can hear myself. Reluctant, nervous, happy, enthusiastic, tired before you start. I presume that person might have been engaging with new programming languages more than once. Eager, syntax. Okay, so that person's thinking just syntax. Stressed. I'm just trying to see which ones are new. Anxiety, excited, eager. Okay, so overall, it seems that there is quite a positive feeling, although definitely a feeling of nerves and being challenged. So I just want to quickly get back to my presentation. Thank you for participating in that, colleagues, and we'll soon get to talk about that. So as I saw, and as most of you indicated, I was also taught programming. My first programming introduction at school level, as I was saying, was being taught to code by a teacher. So unfortunately, this was kind of how it felt, and I hope the video is going to work. So let's see.
The Great Depression passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effect?
Ellie.
it did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Okay, so
In 1930, there
as I'm sure a lot of us can attest, teachers or lecturers often really try to impart their programming knowledge to us through Q&A, as we saw in this video with Beulah. And I must say, I love this video because I often go to the practical sessions with my students, and this is how it sometimes feels, just quite disconcerting. So of course there is a time and place for everything. However, relying solely on a lecturer demonstrating a piece of code and you blindly following really does not bear much fruit, we've realized. And in turn, it actually creates a lecturer-dependent student who, when faced with a new challenge or a different scenario, which often is even very similar to the scenario that we have gone through in the class, they don't have the ability to transfer their knowledge from one situation to another. And this is exactly the problems, colleagues, as to why we have decided to, not decided, but have been inclined to rather go towards skills-based learning, where we are trying to encourage our students to become self-directed and rather not just be content-based or syntax-based in that sense. Now, of course, I really don't want to make this presentation a theoretical overload of jargon. However, it is obviously important to just elucidate what definitions drive my understanding of the concepts pertaining to this presentation. So, of course, these scholars are quite old, or these references, so an academic will immediately say, oh, but those references are too old. But these people are really seen as the pioneers in self-directed learning. Knowles, for instance, is seen as the father of self-directed learning, and he defines it as a process where an individual assumes responsibility for their own learning, sets their own learning goals, gathers resources, and chooses appropriate learning strategies and evaluates their progress, all of which can be done with or without the help of others. So, of course, that last little part really does imply that the lecturer has a space in a learner's self-directed learning process. It's not to say that it's not self-study, it's not individual study. And this is often something that happens, is people see self-directed learning as something that's self-study, which it really is not. So Gibbons says that a self-directed learner should be able to ask questions, find relevant information, analyze the situation, make thoughtful decisions, determine his or her own point of view, and then test if the point of view is correct. And I think if we think of even just that Paul Yo's steps of problem solving, you will immediately see that there's quite some relation to that. And this is, again, just one of the reasons why self-directed learning is viewed so relevant in especially computer science. And then in the case of my expertise, well, or lack thereof, I would say, my focus is computer programming, specifically Delphi, and then, of course, also spreadsheets with computer applications technology students. So if we look at active teaching and learning, these are strategies that really place the student at the center of the learning process. Now, Konopka and his colleagues noted that active teaching and learning aims to create an environment where the student can actively engage in their own learning process, and in doing so, develop higher order cognitive skills. So I think, Professor Lister, and I hope I'm not mistaken here, but would also agree that we really want to aim to get to the point where our students can eagerly and easily engage with the higher levels of Bloom. But if we are not giving them the opportunity to actually reach those levels, then we are really giving them a disservice. So if we look at some of the active teaching learning strategies found in literature, which have been used in computer science education, we see that, and let me just say that this is really by no means an exhaustive list. I mean, I only mentioned 4, but these are just some that popped up. So technology-assisted learning strategies, or some people will call it e-learning, technology-supported learning, online learning, blended learning. It goes by many names. But this has really been on the fore, especially now in the times of COVID. Then we see strategies like problem-based learning, and I think we tend to use this not perhaps as structured in our own computer science classes, but I think something like the PAT at high school level was perhaps intended to be a problem-based learning and semi-project-based learning activity. However, in my experience, and this is just really limited from my own views, it's really moved to something that has actually been taken back to a teacher-directed checklist and tell the learners exactly what they have to do exercise, which please, and I will be open to engage with, in some conversations about that, but it does not seem like that was the intent when it was initiated back in the day. So then, of course, peer instruction in various forms. And then one of the strategies on homegrown soil, which I think a lot of us have engaged with, is pair programming as a cooperative learning strategy developed by Prof. Elsa Mens and Professor Leila Goosen in 2008 already. Of course, Prof. Elsa Mens having written quite a lot on that when she was still very active in computer science education. So then, if I look at active teaching learning strategies that I use to attempt to at least promote self-directed learning in computer science education, I can just mention that I use 4 strategies, or I have been using these strategies in the past. And I can say that these strategies I've actually started using. I've been involved in, let's say, in computer science education since about 2010 when I was teaching IT and CAT, and then, of course, moved to tertiary and have just been using it furthermore. Also because of the fact just that if something works, why would you want to change that? So I just realized for me as a student, I remember that I really did not understand code. I really did not know why I had to memorize these chunks and then try and apply them to scenarios that didn't make sense. And it was only once I started engaging on my own and really being active with the content myself that I realized that this is actually something that I can understand. And then, of course, my programming excelled. And that was that process occurred in a cooperative learning environment. Prof. Elsa was the lecturer, and we did pair programming. And for the first time, I actually had the opportunity to really have to explain to my friend, why I'm doing some code the way I'm doing it, and why they are doing it the same way they're doing it. And really from that experience, I realized that there could be something to it. So obviously when I became a lecturer, it just made sense that I would continue to try and investigate this. So I will just briefly, and really, colleagues, I don't want it to be a, like I said, a too theoretical presentation. I really want it to be more practical and just share my experiences. So I'm just briefly going to go through these 4 strategies and as examples of what you could consider perhaps to promote self-directed learning. Now, pair programming as a strategy has been used in the industry, and I think we all know it's almost as old as time. However, it is a programming strategy that has been proven successful time and time and again. What lacked, however, was when one implemented it as a teaching learning strategy, was the fact that we saw, and not myself, but Prof. Elsa those years, saw that you still get the idea of one learner perhaps just running away with the code, especially the stronger learner, and the other one getting the marks and just free riding and actually not learning. So in that whole scenario, the idea came about to actually include the 5 elements of cooperative learning to ensure that both students are actually held accountable to learn and to actually engage in this learning process. So if we look at the 5 elements of cooperative learning, we see that we've got positive interdependence, and this is the element where the learners actually both know that we are sinking or swimming together. So if we both succeed, if one succeeds, then both of us will succeed. If one of us fails, then both of us will fail. So once you get that idea, you actually realize one student will know, I cannot let my partner fall behind because then I will also be affected. Then face-to-face promotive interaction, and this is the concept of actually having the student realize that I bring some resources and some knowledge to the table, and my friend does the same. And in this process, we are actually just expanding our resource base. Then individual accountability, and I think this is one of the elements that's really so important that's often not visible in normal group work, if I can say that, or even normal pair programming, is the fact that I still have an individual responsibility towards this group or this pair then. So I need to still prepare. I need to make sure I've got resources. I need to really take my role as the driver or the navigator seriously. And that's also why we still give them roles, is because then there's actually a specific responsibility given to that learner, and they know what is expected of them. Then, of course, social skills, which is not the always the highest priority for programmers, if I may generalize. And I think often our students also struggle with that. And during this cooperative learning experience, then, even though it's pair programming in a sense, the students actually have the opportunity to develop these social skills, have conflict, work through the conflict, and especially even in our case where it's teaching students, they are pre-service teachers, this gives them an opportunity to really learn to work with different personalities, which is often not as easy. It's easier said than done. And then lastly, we have group processing, which really speaks to students being able to reflect and know what worked well, and to transfer what they've actually learned from this experience or this learning process to the next one. So in my own classes, I used, just maybe I can just say pre-COVID, it was 2 students sitting together, 1 computer, the general pair programming way of doing it. Then COVID hit, of course, and I started thinking, how will I actually do this, online? Because I really didn't want to fall back to an individual teacher-directed way of doing this. So the first year of COVID, I used Google Meet and Google Apps. So the students would use Google Meet, and the driver would be the person running Delphi on their computer and then also sharing their screen. And then I asked the students, and they did find this frustrating, I will admit, that they needed to use the chat function to communicate, because I really wanted to be able to see that both students were really engaged, wanted to measure and make sure that they are actually taking the individual accountability serious, etc., etc. So unfortunately, in the face-to-face scenario of pair programming, I could switch the roles randomly and actually keep the students on their toes in that sense. But during the online, because the program was running on the initial driver screen, it was just impossible to, not impossible, but it would have just been way logistically, I think, challenging to try and actually switch the roles in an activity. So what I did do, though, is to actually switch the roles after an activity was completed, so that the students still knew that one would be a navigator once, and then they will have the opportunity to be a driver in the next session. So, and then the next year, our university adopted MS Teams, and I just moved over to MS Teams and placed them in pairs using the channel function, and they could go on, but it was pretty much the same situation. So anecdotally, and I did measure their self-direction pre and post this intervention, if I can say that, but that data is still being analyzed. So just anecdotally, I can say that I could see that the STL skills were promoted in the sense that the questions they were asking were higher order questions. The fact that they were actually engaging with resources, the fact that they were actually taking responsibility for their own learning. They weren't as lecturer dependent as what they perhaps would have been. And another thing that was really quite nice for me is the fact that when we came back to a face-to-face environment as this year, I just continued with this way. So in the class, I just said to them, bring headphones with mics, and they just continued using MS Teams. And this allowed that some students that actually had symptoms that weren't allowed to come to campus because of the symptoms of whatever reason, they weren't disadvantaged or isolated at all because they could just connect to the class from their hostel room or from their flat or whatever. And then, of course, although COVID protocols or rules are somewhat lifted now, or mostly, I could at least also observe protocols as needed. So that really helped. And then a thing for me that really stood out was the fact that the students could engage with general computer skills, learning to use collaborative tools, learning to use some applications that they perhaps weren't needing to use before, as opposed to just opening Delphi and just being engaged with this one application in my classroom. So that I thought were quite nice advantages. Then as I mentioned, I also teach computer applications technology, and the module I actually am responsible for is the spreadsheets, or the introduction to spreadsheets. And although we might think it's quite an easy thing, I think Excel is an amazing software application. A lot of the students really struggle with it. They find it abstract. And I realized that, it's necessary to also try and develop their self-direction. If I just think of the time when we moved from, I think it was Microsoft Office 2010 to 2013, where it looked a bit different, the GUI changed. And some of my colleagues even were really so overwhelmed because they didn't know how to really, navigate through this. And that's really a place where if I'm a self-directed learner, I'll actually be able to gather resources, think critically, be creative, etc., and overcome this challenge quite easily. So that's something I really wanted to impart in my computer applications students as well. So I actually just went on with the pair programming, and you'll see there is quite a trend. I obviously love pair programming, and just took out the programming component. So it was more problem-based in the sense that the students got a problem to solve in Excel. And once again, there was the driver and the navigator, obviously the 5 elements of cooperative learning. And I used Google Apps. So they used Sheets, Slides, and Docs. And in this case, it was actually quite easy for them to swap roles, even in one activity, because it's such a collaborative tool. So I could just say to them, okay, after 10 or 15 minutes of engaging as a navigator, please switch and you become the driver and you become the one typing, etc. So here, once again, it was clear that STL skills were promoted, especially, once again, things like using resources and just thinking out of the box, etc. The online learning component was quite easy. So I had been implementing this in my class on a face-to-face and just experimenting with it while I was doing my face-to-face teaching and learning. And then COVID hit, and I think it was just by pure luck that I'd been experimenting with this way of doing it in my class, and the students literally just went home, but they went on just as we did in class. Once again, of course, COVID protocols were observable, and I really did value the fact that general computer skills was also stimulated, which is such an added bonus when you are using more than just the application that was prescribed. Then second, lastly, and this one is probably one of the strategies I was most excited about, was during my PhD thesis, I had the privilege of actually working with grade 10 IT learners, and I heard the question about whether they are seen as novice programmers. And yes, I was actually wondering, I don't know how I would answer it myself, but definitely that they struggle with programming often. I think we will not really have to debate too long. So I had about 23 schools in South Africa that engaged with my study, and some of them did pair programming without Socratic questioning, some did Socratic questioning on an individual basis, and some did a combination. And then, of course, just to be scientifically more sound, I did have a control group as well. But the group that outshined all the other groups was the pair programming with Socratic questions. So once again, we had the driver and the navigator situation, but the navigator was given some Socratic questions to help guide their questioning, because what I have found is that as we get older, we do sometimes know how to frame our questions better and think about things. But a 15, 16-year-old sometimes as a bit of a challenge to really know how to ask a question or what questions to ask. So the Socratic questions were really just a way of actually directing the questioning and really stimulating specifically critical thinking as a SDL skill. As I mentioned, it can be implemented individually as well, and there were definitely some advantages to even just probing the questions to the learners, even when they were working individually. So I would really recommend, if you are not a fan of group work or pair programming for that matter, to still consider something like Socratic questioning, where the learner once again is placed at the center and given just some guidance as to how to direct their own thinking. So what did happen was that we found statistically that SDL skills improved, critical thinking also improved. The students or the learners worked faster. I remember I had one teacher from I think she was from East London or something, and she was saying to me, you know what, you actually just made me more work. And I said to her, how did that work? She said, you know, they actually worked so much faster through the activities when they were doing pair programming that I had to think up new activities for them. And this is after this teacher was very reluctant to actually start using pair programming, because she said she thought it would actually take too much time, but it actually did not. And another comment was that from another teacher was saying that the learners that were the naughty ones in the class were actually now engaged, because there was a structured way of them having to be engaged. So it wasn't just, once again, work with, you know, just quickly work with a partner. There were real specific strategies built in to make them more engaged in the learning process, if I can say it like that. So these questions are quite small, but it's just to show you what the questions entailed. So each student or each learner actually got a copy of these questions on I made a little keychain for each of them, and they could just flip through the questions. And it could be questions like the navigator could ask the driver, what would be an alternative, or what are the consequences of this assumption? You know, if we are using one structure, let's say repeat or whatever it might be, you know, what would be the consequences of that? How will it affect, and how can we actually apply this to everyday life? Isn't there perhaps a connection, you know? And it's through these questions that the transfer to the next scenario might be a little bit more doable or actually stimulated then. And then lastly, one of the more recent active learning strategies I've been using is what we call knowledge surveys. And this is something that's so simple and easy to use. So I often do this when I just really want the students to actually get to grips with what are we going to do in this lesson, what is expected of me, and how can I actually place myself in this learning process before we even start. So it's a tool to direct the learning process, and students know what they can expect in this lesson. So Carl Worth, one of our colleagues from America, is the guru in knowledge surveys. And what he has actually said is he realized that his students actually start learning how to assess themselves, because this is a tool that they actually also don't know. And this is also an SDL skill, is being able to reflect. And we often don't have this. And if you're not given the opportunity to develop this, where will you learn it? So just to give you an idea of how this knowledge survey works, it's really a self-assessment tool that the learner or the student then completes themselves. And you can use, I use my study unit outcomes, for instance. So a student can ask themselves, I can demonstrate knowledge and skills in using reiteration in a Delphi program. And then they rate themselves at the beginning, so that, and this is the post one, but the pre will look exactly the same. And they give themselves a rating. So, a lot of times all the outcomes will be a 0 or 1, because they might have heard of something, but they don't really know. And then, of course, the lesson occurs or the study unit is completed. And then they do the same survey at the end of the lesson, if I can call it that. And the idea is hopefully that they would have moved from a 0, 1 to perhaps a 2 or 3, or you can use whatever scale you want, up to 5 or 10 or whatever. But the point being is that the student gets the opportunity to really think, what have I learned? What progress has occurred? Where are still some gaps that I may experience, etc. And for me as a lecturer, this actually gives me an opportunity to see where are my students still, having some challenges. And I don't let this count any marks at all. So the students very easily or quickly realize they can be honest. It's not going to affect their marks because they are very mark driven. But at least it gives them an opportunity of knowing, okay, what are we going to do in the study unit? So it's just our outcomes and where have I progressed and where are my gaps? So it really stimulates their own critical thinking again, their reflection, etc. So Bertie, can I just, or Joe, just, in terms of time, I don't want to go over.
No, you've got some time still left.
Okay.
No problem.
So
if you come up until half past of the presentation, we can do some questions, and then Mr. Amabu can present. There's no problem.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. So just a short little clip on what some of my students said. We made a video on at our faculty with some lecturers that have been applying active teaching learning strategies specifically to promote self-directed learning. And you will see I do look a bit different than the photo on the program, but so sit back and enjoy.
En nie so lekker wees vir my nie, maar soos wat ons aangegaan het ons meer coöperatiewe werk gedoen. Ons het in pare gewerk waar ons probleme opgelos het, en die voordeel daarvan is dat as julle 2 mense is wat saamwerk, dan kyk julle na 'n probleem uit 2 verskillende perspektiewe. So dit beteken julle kan meer oplossings kry wat dan sal werk vir die probleem.
It's really actually exciting because you learn a lot from them, they learn a lot from you. You have someone that can listen to you, that understands you.
Soos al hoe meer ons gevorder het in hierdie semester, het dit vir my lekker geraak want jy sien wat sê die ander persoon en hoe redeneer hulle oor 'n saak. So jy sien hulle oogpunt en jy sien ook joune, en dan as jy nog steeds nie verstaan nie, kan jy die dosent vra vir hulp. So jy leer by 3 verskillende mense.
Ek voel dit is my plig as dosent om nie net leerinhoude vir die studente oor te dra nie, maar werklik waar hulle holisties ontwikkel om sukses te behaal in ander klasse ook.
Ek dink ek het nou meer daai metode begin toepas op al my ander modules, omdat ons so min tyd het, wat ons klas het 'n mens nou meer tyd dat jy self by die huis moet werk.
Voorbereiding is belangrik, want dan weet jy waar gaan die les, en dan het jy reeds al 'n voorsprong. Na die tyd, dan kan jy ook weer refleksie doen van wat jy gedoen het.
Ek sou graag wil hê dat meer dosente selfgerigte leer moet toepas in hulle klasse, want dit stel leerders meer in staat om eie verantwoordelikheid te neem. So dit beteken leerders sal beter vaar ook in hulle akademiese werk as wat hulle net passief sit in die klas en die dosent dra al die inhoud oor vir hulle.
So I would recommend for lecturers to bring about group work in the classes and yeah.
Cat-TTN het my definitief daai vermoë aangeleer om self te kan werk. Ek voel
So yes, colleagues, as you can see from the mouths of babes, as they say, the students really, although starting to be quite reluctant in terms of working in groups, in pairs, they definitely do experience the value of it at the end of the day. I have initially, I can say right in the start when I was still very young and ignorant, I was very strict on the students had to work in pairs, etc. And they had to work in a group. And I have slacked and realized that students also, it's a bit of an overload for them to be in a social environment constantly in the class. So there are times when individual work is really also needed, and students just needing the opportunity to focus on themselves, etc. So just to say, I do realize that group work is good, paired programming is good, but I do also advocate for the fact that sometimes giving a student an opportunity to be an individual is not always the worst. So just a final thought, if we can go to Mentimeter again, just to wrap up, and then yeah, I'll almost be done. Okay, so what skills do we need to be a successful programmer? That's the question. I presume we're all still connecting because I see there's no one connected yet. Ah, logical thinking. Okay, thanks for that. Problem solving. Reasoning, interpreting. Tracing. I wonder if there's a link to that word and Prof. Lister's talk earlier this morning. Dedication, patience, definitely patience, perseverance, creative thinking, computational thinking. I don't see anyone saying knowing syntax or memorizing code or anything in that regard. And this is what I was hoping to get at, is the fact that once we move away from this idea of memorizing code and chunks of just code structures and moving towards a skill where a learner will be able to actually just transfer whatever knowledge they've got into different scenarios, then that they would actually have success in programming. So I see patience, dedication, good lecturer. Yes, that's an interesting one, a good lecturer. My question always being, if you have a good lecturer now and you end up having to code in another language and that lecturer is not there anymore, what will be the situation then for you? Thanks for participating in that. I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint just to finish off. Okay, so if we look at self-directed learning skills and characteristics, it includes characteristics like, or skills like perseverance, creativity, being resilient, being self-motivated, having a love for learning, being inquisitive, questioning assumptions. I think we can both, or a lot of us can attest to, our good programmers in our classes are often the ones that challenge us as well. And that's because they actually have the skill. Goal-directed, critical thinkers, problem solvers, being reflective, and obviously having 21st century skills. And if we look at the responses we got from the Mentimeter, it's definitely clear that there's a relation between a good programmer, what we as a collective see as a good programmer or programming skills, and self-directed learning skills. Then, of course, just to bring it to our education and specifically our basic education, if we look at our general aims in the CAPS, it's clear that it totally speaks to a self-directed learner. It's someone that can identify and solve problems, cooperate effectively, analyze, organize information, communicate, apply, so if we once again think of the definition of a self-directed learner, and you look at these aspects that are mentioned by the department, it's also clear again to see that we are supposed to really be developing our learners to be self-directed and not just know code. So, of course, our students and learners need self-directed learning skills to be successful in computer science and especially in programming, especially because we know programming is such a dynamic field that really changes. Programming languages change, problems change, scenarios change, etc. It is our responsibility to ensure a conducive environment that will stimulate these skills. And there are many, many active teaching learning strategies that you can use. And I would suggest one experiments with them as much as you can and really see what resonates with your personality, what you can deal with, and what you feel comfortable with, because it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all recipe. Thank you very much. There is my email address as well, and just to say there are the references. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Sorry, Betty, you can go on.
I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Bailey. It was quite informative, and I think we can all learn from that approach where we kind of have champions, and Prof. Lister also alluded to that in his first kind of a talk when he said that you can have a class champion that assists others, and I think that is one big approach that we can all learn from and adjust our own teaching strategies to also include these kind of approaches where the students assist one another and help one another to master the content. I do not know if there's any questions. If there's somebody with a question, they're more than welcome to ask.
I've got one question, Bertie. The question is, during load shedding, yes, you've had this pair programming model. Did you find that students are not that active since COVID that they were before COVID?
I actually did, definitely let me say this, my contact sessions that I had scheduled where I said the students can connect and ask me questions, that they were definitely not as engaged with, few of them would actually attend the contact sessions. What I was really glad about and thankful for was the fact that the activities I was giving them were that they had to do, I gave them the partner that they had to work with in that week. And then, like I said, I asked them to use the chat function so that I could kind of make a sense of the process that the pair went through, so that they engaged with quite actively. I think because it was an assignment, and obviously they knew that I was going to mark it, and it was going to count towards their module mark. So they definitely still engaged with each other without and also perhaps I can also just say this, pre-COVID, students had to come to the class and it was synchronous cooperative learning or pair programming, if I can say that. And then when COVID hit, I had a bit of a mind shift and decided to allow them to actually work on an asynchronous way as well and work on a time that really suited them. So I did ask the students to try and really negotiate with each other in terms of diaries and what worked for them. And I think that actually made them be more engaged because they could feel a little bit more in control of their time, as opposed to always coming to my class at a specific time. That perhaps, for some students early in the morning is really a challenge. So yeah, I actually think they were more engaged in that sense.
Thank you. I just want to ask if there's still people that wants to ask questions. I didn't see anything more in the chat box. If I just want to ask if there's somebody else that also wants to a question. Bertie, did you receive any other questions from your side?
I did
Okay,
receive
you can go on.
Yes. It asked, Dr. Bailey, the schools that you visited, was one in a rural area with lower kind of resources, and what did you experience if you did visit such a school? Is there any experiences that you have that you could share that was different, or was it also motivating?
Yes, so the 23 schools, I actually initially started with 25, but 2 fell out or withdrew or whatever. And they were really equally spread in terms of, I actually stratified in my grouping to make sure that I had schools in urban areas or metropolitan areas and then rural areas. So to give you an idea, and I think my colleagues from Northwest will know, but one of the schools, you literally drove past the cows and the dirt road, my poor little car really just managed. But what actually helped was, thankfully, that school was a pair programming school. And the fact was that they didn't have enough resources, but because the learners were working together on one computer, it obviously halved the resources needed in terms of computers and textbooks, because you should know the navigator really is the only one that's allowed, if you want to say that, to use the textbook just to make sure that they feel I've got a role and I've got a role to play here as well. And the driver is the only one using the computer so that they feel this is my work, this is my job. So luckily that teacher, he was letting the students work together on computers, but in an unstructured way. So what would happen is, you would get the overbearing student that would just hog the computer and the other one probably fell behind. But with a more structured way of working in terms of saying to the teacher, give them specific roles, swap so that you make sure that, the students or the learners actually both get an equal opportunity in front of the computer and with the textbook, really did help. So I actually think it's an answer for the class with less resources, even more so than the class with a lot of resources. I hope, yes, I hope that answers the question.
No, we did indeed. We have some comments in the chat which says, thank doctor, it's really inspirational, and that a big reminder that I as a teacher should adjust my own teaching habits again. So that was just a comment that was made. Then we also had somebody asking about the recordings. What's going to happen is we've got a person dedicated at TUT that's also joined us here, and we spoke about him this morning. He's going to edit the recordings for us, and then we will make it available at a later stage. All the live streams are available on TUT's Facebook page, TUT Live, so that is available there, but we will also release a nice set of edited videos that will be available for everybody, and we will communicate that at a later stage. So from my side, we would like to really thank Dr. Roxanne van Vuuren. Maybe you want just to close.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bertie. I just want to say why we say edited. You know, there's a lot of times that we break for 10 minutes and 5 minutes, then it's dead time on the video. So we don't want to have the videos that long. We editing things out that that is not necessary to be into the videos. But thank you very, very much, Dr. Bailey. We really appreciate your presentation, and we really enjoyed your presentation very, very much. There's one thing that I also want to congratulate your students, that they're so active and that they prepare for lectures. I think that's the one thing that we from TUT must learn from you. How would we get our students also to prepare for a lecture? Because it seems to me that is a really good thing. I don't know how many universities the students will prepare for a lecture.
Perhaps
So
I can
maybe
just jump in there. I just want to say, I think that's the value of having them work in pairs, is the fact that I can't hide.
Oh, I think we lost Dr. Bailey just now.
I'm back, revived from the grave. Yeah, so I think the fact is just I give them partners, so it's not friends, and that's also one of the reasons why I actually rather divide them myself, because if it's my friend, then they will think, oh, it's okay, I know we had, you know, a visit last night and you couldn't prepare for the class. But if it's not a friend, it's a bit of a bigger embarrassment if I get to the class unprepared and you prepared. And now, you know, I'm looking like the person that's really failing the pair. So I think that helps as well. And that's also one of the advantages.
But thank you very much. We really, really enjoyed it, and we will definitely try this approach as well, especially now in these times that we need to get the students to work on their own and do self-directed learning, because at this stage it is quite a difficulty, because from our side, if I might add, what we found is that students come from schooling systems that they get directed learning all the time. They're instructed by teachers and they only do that, and then it is a real difference for them to change to self-directed learning. But we've learned quite a lot from you, and we will definitely try that methodology to get them to learn themselves. Thank you very much for your time. But